should I take a couple of minutes? Okay, just get this one screen off my screen. There we go. So I'm happy to introduce Paul Shipman, who will be presenting his cookbook, Feast on Adventure, which contains a variety of simple to make and compact meals for traveling for us outdoor enthusiasts. Paul's background has been canoeing, camping, and hiking, etc., since he was a baby. His family lived in an outdoor weekends and vacations life with a cabin in the Canadian Shield from when he was a baby, when he was 5 years old and on. His motivation and primary impetus for his recipes in his cookbook came from living at the cabin and when his wife was diagnosed with a number of food intolerances that precluded existing recipes at that time and commercial options. His research and experimentation led him to develop a framework for creating recipes that resulted in this book. It is not a diet-specific book, but he says it's a diet-agnostic book. Paul is an advanced hobbyist. He is very well read and experienced in the kitchen and has also done a few small professional catering gigs. And he was born in Winnipeg, and he currently lives in a little town outside of Winnipeg called St. Anne, where he lives immediately next to the Seine River, which he says is a bit of a local paddling haven. Paul's resume for paddling has been extensive on lakes, and he's been out paddling on lakes, I guess, in the canoe in his first year of life. So canoeing is a big part of his mother's life, and therefore he has paddled mostly lake routes, Kejimkujik National Park, and I was there. It's a beautiful place, other than the black flies yes. One time of year. Boundary Waters, Quetico, Nopinning Provincial Park, including the Bird River, White Shell Provincial Park, including the Winnipeg River and White Shell River, and kayak the Columbia and the Kootenays. And he's also, as we know, a level 1 instructor. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul. Looking forward to learning and hearing your recipes. Paul, thank you for contacting the club.
Thanks, Les and Laura. Thanks everybody for having me tonight. I'm really excited to do this demonstration. I've been doing this demonstration for the last 2 weeks now. I have a presentation that I do as well, so I've kind of been mixing it up depending on who I've been working with. 2 weeks ago, I did a session with a group of scouts, and I thought that that was a good place to start this off because they're young and they don't want to sit around and watch stuffy old presentation PowerPoint kind of thing. So yeah, I'm Paul Shipman. I'm the author of this book. It is Feast on Adventure, a guide to lightweight, scrumptious meals for the outdoor enthusiast. Just add water, scenic views optional. This is a whole cookbook. It's kind of around the whole idea of the one-pot meal. And the one-pot meal is a big pillar of Leave No Trace. So for those of us who try to follow as much as we can the ethos of Leave No Trace when we're out in the wilderness, one-pot meal is a big part of their planning principle. And specifically, one-pot meals are important because they let us minimize our reliance on campfires, focus on using camp stoves instead for cooking. And really the only thing generally that we need to do with these meals is boil water, which means that we can minimize our fuel consumption and get dinner ready fast. So for me, you know, wilderness meals, it's really important to me that they be flavorful. I want like a flavor reward at the end of the day. And that's one of the things that I personally have found lacking in kind of existing do-it-yourself, just dehydrate meals. So my book and my framework is kind of different from the normal book. It's not unique in that there are other examples of this kind of backcountry cooking out there in books and in websites and things like that. But the idea here is that rather than focusing on spending a whole evening making meals in the kitchen and then putting them in the dehydrator and hoping that they're going to rehydrate and taste good later, that kind of all goes by the wayside and gives you more flexibility. The idea here is that we're going to work with dehydrated ingredients or freeze-dried ingredients or instant ingredients, and mix them together after they've been dehydrated to create the meal and generate something that is really tasty and, you know, quick to prepare. And ultimately it creates big efficiencies for you because you can spend your time just dehydrating ingredients, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and it makes it way easier on you in terms of planning and time and cleanup and everything. But it also gives you the option, if you don't want to dehydrate, in that you can pretty much buy everything. You can buy everything dehydrated or freeze-dried, have it on your shelf, mix it together and go from there. And that includes stuff that you can just get at your local grocer, to, you know, going further afield and buying things that are freeze-dried from online sources mostly. But really it runs the gamut and you can do what works for you. And that's what I really want to encourage, that regardless of what your time commitment is, what your level of interest in doing like food prep at home is, you can do this very easily and quickly and get something that is going to be good at the end of the day. So Laura, am I able to present my screen for a second?
I'll go and change the screen setting here so you can do that. So I've just changed it. You go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'll just do the desktop for now. We'll do this quick because. So for tonight, this is the recipe that we're going to make. It's an actual recipe from my book. You are welcome to take a print screen if you wanted to keep a copy of this. We're going to be making something called the Fireside Burrito Bowl. And while we're on this page, I just kind of want to give you a step-by-step to the navigation of my recipes. So throughout my book, this format is generally the same throughout. Underneath the title of the recipe, it's going to give you an idea of what the total calories are for a single serving, what the expected weight of that single serving will be when it's, you know, not before water is added. So when you've got it in your bag and you're carrying it everywhere, it's going to give you an idea of how much water you need to boil to rehydrate it. But as I'm going to show you later, you don't need to like measure that out to get a good meal at the end of the day. And then how long to leave it sit in, you know, water, hot water, to have it rehydrate. On the right hand side, you're going to see some iconography, and that's going to indicate what diets are supported by the meal. So you'll see in this picture that we've got dairy-free and gluten-free are in color, meaning that by default, this recipe happens to be gluten-free and dairy-free. And then the other two are grayed out, meaning that optionally through substitution, you can make it vegetarian or vegan if that applies to your diet. Those are the four diets that I've primarily identified throughout the book. But that said, like if you're on a low sodium diet or low sugar, or you can't have soy, or so on and so forth, if you're allergic to chicken, if you can't have eggs, right? All those things I document well in the book throughout the beginning to show you you know, what ingredients are available out there, what they're used for, and what you can use as substitutes for them if you're on any particular kind of diet. If we look at the recipe, we're going to see a couple of things that are kind of grayed out. So I'm going to call your attention to the half cup of protein. So this is an indicator that most of my recipes are going to call for protein one way or the other, because it's a really important part of our adventuring diet, right? We're doing work every day. We're making our muscles sore. We're using, you know, mass from our muscles to do things, and we need to replenish that. And making sure that we include good proteins in our meals is one of the primary things for us to consider in terms of that part of our recovery. So throughout my cookbook, generally, I'm going to simply say something like half cup of protein, and then let it be up to you to identify what makes the most sense for you, either from a diet perspective or a taste preference perspective. So while I recommend ground beef here, that doesn't mean that diced chicken wouldn't be just as good. So it's totally an option for you. But if you're vegetarian or vegan, you have the option of like refried beans or regular beans or soy curls or something like that, or even textured vegetable protein. So there's lots of options that you can do to make these recipes work for you. Yeah, okay, so hopefully if you wanted a photo of this, you've taken it, because I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to get to the demonstration. Okay. am I able to make me big for everybody? You guys might have to pick yourself if you want me to come up. in full.
Yes. We can change our screen so that you're looking bigger.
Okay, you'd probably benefit from that, but totally up to you whether you do it or not. So to begin with, we're gonna make this one pot meal. I did say that it was one serving, and I want to be really clear that I'm talking about a whole serving for one person, and not what a not what a commercial package would say is for one person. So yeah, and I guess I should say that in this whole world of one pot meals, you're not limited to my recipes either. There are a lot of commercial options. Backpacker's Pantry, for example, Alpine Air, Mountain House, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all good options. There's even good things that you can do by using prepackaged things like stovetop stuffing or Knorr sides or hamburger helper or things like that. So there's really lots of options. But tonight we're going to do a full-on do-it-yourselfer, and I'm going to be using this bag to make my dish and store it in for carrying into the backcountry before I would actually do the prep in the field. This is a reusable sandwich bag. It's not the only variety on the market. I happen to use Rusby bags, but that's just because they were available at Winners and really cheap. And yeah, so primarily this is what I use for backcountry. You can absolutely just use a Ziploc bag. They are fairly ubiquitous and relatively inexpensive, and you can find them everywhere. There are, of course, environmental concerns around using them because they're not super reusable, which means that you're creating waste and doing a lot of consumption and all that stuff. But totally is acceptable if that's something that you're comfortable with. These are also relatively inexpensive. You can get a pack of 4, usually for around $10. They last a really long time. They're quite sturdy, so they're not likely to puncture or tear on you. They're Ziploc. They've got really good odor concealing, so it doesn't make it attractive to wildlife. And it's pretty lightweight. So a standard medium-sized Ziploc bag is somewhere on the order of like 5 to 8 grams. This is on the order of 10 to 13 grams. So while it is about double the weight of a Ziploc bag, it's not really something that you're going to notice that much in your pack, particularly if you're on a canoe trip. If you're really, really into the ultralight hiking world, a week's worth of food is going to add 140 grams to your pack. And, if you're counting every gram, you're probably going to notice 140 grams. But for those of us who are canoeing, we're not going to notice that. There's alternatives, though. I mean, you're not limited to this or a Ziploc bag. This is another really good choice for storing, for prepping meals at home and storing them for your trip. This is a Ball freezer jar. So this is for making freezer jam. It's available on Amazon. It's available pretty much anywhere that you do canning. This is a 16-ounce or pint-sized jar. So that's about 500 milliliters. It's almost the perfect size for any of these meals. They're all going to come up pretty close to the top, meaning that there's not a lot of extra space, which means that it really packs tightly. Maybe not as tightly as a bag does, because this will, fill empty space that you've got in your bag, whereas this is more rigid. But this is way less likely to puncture or crack or anything like that. It still has good sealing. It's a twist top that creates a good seal against scents getting out there. This is also a good vessel to do your rehydration in. So if you don't want to bring a cook kit along with you, you could just, rehydrate in this, which isn't to say that you can't rehydrate in these. You can. These are much more difficult to clean in the field, though. So you're going to end up leaving a little bit of slurry in the bottom there that's going to get gross over your trip. Whereas this, you can do, a dishes wash in kind of thing. These also aren't too expensive. A pack of 4 is probably $10 to $12, something like that. But they are heavier. So this is going to come in around 60 grams. So that's about 6 times the weight of this bag that I was talking about earlier. And then the last option that I can suggest is one of these. This is a silicone freezer bag. It's reusable. It's dishwasher safe, which is nice for cleaning at home. Again, it's got like a really tight seal at the top to prevent scents from attracting animals and things like that. The other big benefit to it is that it's got really good insulation. So the silicone itself is really insulating, and that has a really big benefit to rehydration. So if you want to rehydrate in the bag, this is a really, really good choice because of that insulation. Insulation keeps the temperature high, which really promotes rehydration in the field. And I'm going to say rehydration a lot tonight, and that really just means adding water. And that is the cooking process when we're in the field, rehydrating our meal. The downside to these is that they are a little more expensive and they're very heavy. So this is around 120 to 130 grams. So a week-long trip where you're going to package up 14 of these for one person, that's 1.4 kilograms, right? Which is 5-ish pounds that you're adding to your bag just in, you know, these silicone bags. So maybe not a great option in that kind of scenario. So your mileage may vary, and that's entirely up to you. So I'm going to pull out my standard sandwich bag, my reusable sandwich bag here. And you'll see that it's gusseted on the bottom, which is nice because that'll sit flat when we're prepping, and it makes it way easier to clean and gives us a little bit more room in the sack. So we're going to start this recipe. For those of you who took a picture and or kept it, you'll see that we're going to start off with 2/3 of a cup of rice. So I talked a little bit about how important protein is in these meals. The other thing that's really important is making sure that we get good complex carbohydrates. We are, again, exercising a lot. We're using a lot of energy every day. We need to do our best to replenish that energy. And complex carbohydrates are the way to do that. This meal is going to be rice-based, but not all my recipes are. I've got a lot of good noodle recipes. Also, I use things like polenta or cornmeal, and what else do I use? Mashed potatoes, diced potatoes, you know, lots of things like that that lend itself to be good complex carbohydrates that have a lot of conventional recipes that already kind of rely on them. Like think of a shepherd's pie that relies on a mashed potato, or a spaghetti that uses noodles. So I'm going to put 2/3 of a cup in here. I really like minute rice. Minute rice is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Any grocery store you go to is going to have it. It's really, really cheap. This is a really big box of minute rice. I just bought 2 of these the other day at Costco. They were like $5.49 a box. I really don't see any reason why people dehydrate their own rice. It makes 0 sense to me from both a cost and time perspective. This works super, super well. It rehydrates. No cooking is required at all. It tastes like rice in the field. There are others. There are other instant rices. So Uncle Ben's has instant rice. There's lots of generic instant rices. One thing to pay attention to here is going to be the time. So I've based all of my rice meals off of using minute rice, which has a 5-minute cook time generally. They recommend the microwave, but rehydrating works absolutely fine from boiled water. But Uncle Ben's, I think, is 8 minutes, as is a lot of the generics. So just be aware of that if you're using different rice, that you might need to let it sit a little longer than my recipe says. The other thing to note is that there's kind of newfangled instant rices on the market from Uncle Ben's and some others, like jasmine rice, basmati rice, brown rice, etc. And while all of them proclaim to be instant rice, they all need simmering for 10 minutes. And I have not had any success in rehydration just by leaving it in hot water. The only way I've gotten soft rice out of those varieties is to actually do the simmering. So you need to be aware of that if you're experimenting with those rices, just because that's going to add time and fuel to your prep in the evening. So while rice is ubiquitous and easy to use, one thing that I would recommend as a potential substitute, and that I had listed on the recipe, is this stuff. So this is instant quinoa. You can find this at a number of online places. I have been getting mine through Outdoor Herbivore. Backpackers Pantry purports to carry it, meaning that they list it on their website, but every time I've gone to try to buy it from them, it's sold out. Thrive Life has been the same situation for me. You may, be luckier than me. And it's not like I check every week or anything. So I'm sure there are times that they do in fact have supply. It is a great substitute in rice dishes. Pretty well any recipe that you find that uses rice or instant rice instant quinoa is going to work really well. It's a pretty similar flavor profile, very similar texture profile. It rehydrates in the same amount of time. The big benefit to using something like quinoa instead of rice is that it adds quite a bit of protein to your meal. So if you're following a diet that generally has a harder time of incorporating protein, like if you're vegetarian or vegan, or if you're doing something extra strenuous that's using a lot of muscle mass, like mountain climbing or something like that, where you want to have extra protein along with your meal, quinoa is a really good substitution option. And this stuff works amazingly well. Just like the instant rice, it rehydrates really quickly and like to the same texture and flavor you would get out of quinoa that you cooked at home. Okay, so our next step is going to be to add that protein. So I talked about how, I just called for half a cup of protein and you can put in whatever you want. I'm going to show you some options that I have available. This here is freeze-dried diced chicken. This chicken, as well as the diced beef and the ground beef and the ground sausage crumble that you can get from Nutristore, are all really, really great. They rehydrate to almost the exact same texture of chicken that you would get off of your stovetop, or ground beef that you would get off of your stovetop, with exactly that same flavor. And in no time flat, no simmering required or anything like that. The downside is that really you can only find this stuff online, and it's not expensive, but it's not cheap. You might have a different opinion on that. I can make a freeze-dried meal at home with the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight for about $5 to $8, which is generally $2 to $5, or I should say $2 to $7 cheaper than something like Backpacker's Pantry or something like that. An alternative to that, if you're vegetarian or vegan, or even if you're not, but you want to just incorporate something like beans, there are instant refried beans that work really well in meals like this. But we don't have to follow the freeze-dried route. This is what I'm actually going to be using tonight. This is dehydrated at home. It's canned corned beef. I'm using it because I have to use this up. And this is a demo night, so no one else has to taste it but me. Although I did taste this the other day, and I have to say it was actually quite good in the burrito bowl, which surprised me. I flagged this tonight because canned meats is a really good vector for dehydration. And what I mean by that is that more so than freshly cooked meats, these canned meats do a much better job of rehydrating in your dish so that they're soft and normal texture than something like beef jerky would, or like dehydrated cooked chicken. When you take fresh diced chicken or sliced chicken and dehydrate it, it tends to stay quite chewy, toothsome even, when you go through just the rehydration process. And actually, even after simmering for quite a while, it takes some time for it to stop being chewy, and even then it generally ends up stringy. So canned meats generally do a better job of rehydrating to a conventional texture and flavor than fresh. So corned beef is one example of that. But you know what? Costco canned chicken is a really good chicken choice for dehydrating. It dehydrates and rehydrates really well. It's fairly inexpensive. The flavor and texture is relatively close to traditional chicken. And better than corned beef is it's relatively low in fat, which means that we don't have to worry about rancidity in our dried product. Whereas with this corned beef, it has a really short shelf life. If I was actively preparing food to go on a trip, I would want to be dehydrating this the week of, because this has quite a high fat content, as would canned ham or something like Spam. Those meats would have high fat content. And so rancidity, I mean, everyone's tasted, sour nuts and food that smells and tastes a little sour, like meat-wise, probably. And that's usually a pretty good indication that it's gone rancid. And what's happening with rancidity is that it's an oxidation process, meaning that it's caused by oxygen exposure to fat. So it's not something that you can stop in the freezer. It is something that you can slow down, but you still have a drastically shorter shelf life of these meats in the freezer than you would of something like the canned chicken. One of the reasons that I think that this, as well as the canned chicken, rehydrates so much better than fresh is that all of this stuff has to be canned under pressure, meaning that the meat is held under high pressure for 20 to 30 minutes. And that is generally causing cell membranes to be crushed somewhat, which creates a lot more openings in the meat to allow for water to come on board and cause it to rehydrate in your meal. So if you are dehydrating and you're looking for good flavor and good texture, you probably want to think about canned meats over fresh. But if you're looking for sort of a dehydrated source that's cheap, that you can find in a lot of places, this here is meat floss. Technically, the name is Rousong, and you'll see on the list here it is actually labeled as shredded dried pork. This is a product that you can find in Asian specialty stores. It's a Chinese traditional meat that is served on top of stir fries and chow meins and things like that. It's intended to be eaten dry to add texture and a different kind of flavor to your dishes. In this world, though, it actually rehydrates really well. So it's a really good choice as a substitute for other kinds of meat in your dishes. The downside being that it is it's flossy. So the shredded texture is a little different than you are used to, but it works just fine. And in fact, I have a free ebook available on my website, and I have some recipes that utilize this in that book. One in particular being a pulled pork sandwich. So basically you bring fresh bread with you out into the wilderness, and on day 1 or day 2, you just rehydrate the pulled pork and have a pulled pork sandwich, and it's quite nice. But you need something like this, some shredded pork. Okay, so I'm going to add half a cup of protein to my dish, and really the way that I got to that measurement is that most of the freeze-dried product indicate a half cup as being a full serving, and I find it to be about right for one person. If you're someone who likes to eat a lot, you might want to up that to maybe like 3/4 of a cup, but I think you'll find that if you go much further than that, it's too much. So far what I've got in here is I've got my complex carbohydrates for energy, and I've got my protein for replacing muscle mass. The next thing that I'm going to add in here is I'm going to make sure that I get some veggies in my meal, so that I've got fiber going on, and I'm getting a lot of the other nutrients I need. And one of my favorite products for that is something that I dehydrate at home, but you can buy it in some specialty stores and online. So for example, Bulk Barn, you might be able to find this for soups and things like that. But this is a mix of fajita veggies. So what we're looking at here is a mix of different colored peppers and onions. And I'm going to eyeball 2 tablespoons of that using my hand and get that in there. Now, I like this because peppers and onions are really versatile. They go in a lot of dishes, and even dishes that they're not normally in, they fit really well in, like even a shepherd's pie. You wouldn't usually find peppers and onions in, but they'll taste good in it. Now, my recipe for shepherd's pie doesn't call for them, but absolutely, you're welcome to use them. I like them because what I do is I get frozen bags of them like this from my local Sobeys Cash and Carry. These are generally intended for food service, but a lot of the local Sobeys carries them as well. And actually, I've found smaller packs of them as well at Superstore, PC branded. So this bag, I actually picked some up today, and they were like $4.19 a bag. So this bag costs $4.19, which is way cheaper than the same quantity of actual peppers and onions would cost me. It's already sliced and diced for me, and I just throw it right into my dehydrator trays like this. So getting back to that efficiency, here I've had to do no prep work at all. And from a dehydrating perspective, all I have to do is put it in my trays, put it in my dehydrator, put my dehydrator on overnight, and forget about it. This is one of those set it and forget it kind of situations, right? The other real benefit to working with frozen over fresh is that, harkening back to that conversation on canned meats, when we freeze stuff like vegetables, the thing that makes them, you know, less pleasant in conventional cooking for us, like we wouldn't want to serve this as a crudité at a dinner party kind of thing, because they're all going to end up soft and flabby, right? After they thaw. And that's because the water molecules inside each of the cells, they expand when they freeze. Those crystals expand, and it generally causes breakage of the cell membranes. And that, just like in that meat situation, creates a lot of little openings that allow water to come in. So frozen vegetables that you dehydrate will generally rehydrate much more easily, quicker, and better than fresh. All right, so we got that in there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about flavor here. So I think everybody on the call, I hope, would recognize the difference in flavor between bread and toast. Yes? Generally, yes. So the only difference between bread and toast is that we've applied more heat to toast than we have to bread, right? And that creates browning on the bread surface, which creates a lot of flavor compounds. And that's something that we lose completely in the dehydration world, right? Most of the just add water meals that you're going to find recipes for don't do the work to compensate for the fact that you're not cooking it. You're not frying it, you're not roasting it, you're not baking it, you're not grilling it, you're not barbecuing it. So you're not getting those flavor compounds that are created through browning and over high heat. So I tried to look for a lot of solutions to that. And what it really came down to is not this guy specifically, but ones like it. So bouillon is basically a dehydrated soup stock, and really good soup stock is generally those browned products. You basically, you know, evaporate all of the water. Well, first you start by boiling meat and bones or vegetables if you're making a vegetable broth to get all of the flavor compounds out of it and into the water. And then once you have that stock and it's all said and done, you boil it for hours and hours and hours, and that, you know, leaves all the good compounds and removes all the water. And then all of those compounds start to brown at the bottom of the pan very slowly and over a couple hours. And then you're left with this concentrated brown goo that is basically all of that flavor that toast has, or meat that's been barbecued, or, you know, bacon that's been crisped. And then we dehydrate it and powderize it. And that gives us a really good opportunity. It's not the only way to include roasted flavors in our meals, but it's a really good way. So this is the one that I recommend. This brand in particular is the brand that I recommend the most for this kind of cooking. It's Organica. You should be able to find it for sure at Save on Foods. You may find it at Superstore as well. This is a chicken bone broth. They also have a beef bone broth, and they also have a vegetable broth. So all three are really good choices. The recipe that we're working with tonight doesn't actually include this. I've achieved roasted flavors other ways in this particular meal, but many of the recipes that I've made call for a bouillon. Bouillon is something that you can make yourself at home. It takes a lot of work. Basically the whole thing that I just said of, you know, leaving it to boil for a long time, getting a goo, putting that on a tray in the dehydrator, and then pulverizing that in a blender to get powder. But there's other brands available as well. What you don't want to use is you don't want to use a cube. You don't want to use an OXO cube. You don't want to use Better Than Bouillon or anything like that. Those products have a lot of salt in them, and that's going to make your dish just unpalatable. Yeah. I had an accidental experiment with that with some vegetable broth with a couple who was doing some tasting for me, who were vegetarian. So I had to use a vegetable broth, and at the time it was the only one that I could find, and it had more salt in it than I expected, and the dishes were not good. But vegetable broth does work really well if you're vegetarian or vegan, or have any other reason to stay away from a meat broth. And actually, there's another product that you can get on Amazon that is miso powder. So miso usually comes in a paste, and realistically, you could dehydrate your own and make your own powder if you wanted, but you can buy it as a powder. So that's like a common base for like a miso soup, and that is soybean based. So that's an alternative for achieving those flavors without meat. So the next thing we're going to put in this dish is salt. And salt is another really important thing for us to include in our meals. Again, we are adventuring and doing a lot of work. And one of the things that we want to make sure we're replacing is we want to make sure that we're replacing our electrolytes. So I have found that a 1/4 teaspoon of salt is about right in all of my meals. So that's what they call for. This is not required. So if you are on a low sodium diet, you should put in what's appropriate for you. You might even choose to use lemon pepper instead of salt, which is a common salt replacement for those who are on low sodium diets. So when we're making any of these meals, I did talk earlier about how I really want a flavor reward. So I've put a lot of thought into how to deliver those flavors in all of my meals. So we talked about, for example, including the bouillon that I just showed you. And that's one example of how we can include what is known as the 5th flavor, umami. So we all probably learned the same thing in elementary school, that being that there were 4 flavors that our tongue could taste, one being salty, one being sweet, another being acidic, and the last being bitter. And over the last 10 to 15 years, in food culture, we've started talking a lot more about this 5th flavor called umami that comes from the Japanese tradition. And it's really about looking for ingredients that encourage a full mouth taste or a full mouth feeling. It's this idea that there are ingredients that we can include that cause all of the ingredients in our dish to bloom and meld together in our mouth. And I really like to think of the 5 flavors as the primary colors of cooking. When we learned about primary colors, again in elementary school, we learned about red, blue, and yellow, and how every other color can be made by mixing those 3 things together. So all of our meals are the same, and that's true of conventional cooking or for one pot meal in a bag kind of situations. All of these meals have a flavor profile that we're trying to achieve. So tonight I'm trying to make a burrito bowl. A lot of us already have exposure and familiarity to what a burrito bowl should taste like, and that is really a mouth painting of those 5 flavors. We want to create an appropriate balance of bitter, sweet, salty, and acidic, as well as umami, to create the mixture that is a burrito bowl. So tonight we've added salt already. We're going to get the correct amount of sweet for this dish just simply out of the rice. Because it is already a carbohydrate which has natural sugars in it. We're adding to that sweetness by including onions and peppers. And now we're going to look for the other flavors that are currently missing. So we're going to want to add a little bit of bitter and a little bit of sour. Traditionally in a Mexican or a Tex-Mex dish, that sour flavor is going to come out of lime juice. And we're trying to make a meal that's non-perishable, right? We want this to be able to stay in our pack for potentially up to a week or 2 weeks, or maybe even longer as we trip. And we don't want it to go bad while we're waiting to eat it. And so the riskiest thing that we can include in here is anything that has any moisture. Moisture is that path to this spoiling on the trip. So we can't include lime juice. For me, I'm going to include citric acid. So that's upside down for you. This is citric acid or lemon salt. It's pretty ubiquitous as well. It's probably something you don't already have in your kitchen unless you like to make cheese, but it is generally available in the salt and the spices aisle at your superstore or grocery store. You probably also find it at a lot of spice stores and any place that caters to cheese making, because it's a pretty common ingredient in cheese making. Alternatives include, there's now Real Lemon now makes lemon and lime powder. So that would be a good substitute to choose from. There are sources online that provide powdered vinegars. So those would also be good alternatives to citric acid. You can also do things like bringing out fresh lime juice or lemon juice with you in a separate container that you mix in the field when you're there. Yeah, well, I'm going to use citric acid. So as we get to this citric acid, some of you might have noticed on the recipe that I'm including in there 1/8 of a teaspoon. So this is a really important teaspoon to have if you're making single serving one pot meals. I'm going to make you think for a second about making spaghetti on a weeknight at home. When you make a pot of spaghetti, you are usually making 6 to 8 servings, right? And in that pot, you might be including oregano or garlic powder. And for both of those, you're probably going to use around a teaspoon. That would be the general quantity that you would include in that dish. Well, when we're making a single serving, we need to, break that down to 1/6 or 1/8 of what our conventional recipe is. So for a lot of the herbs and spices that we use in these meals, 1/8 of a teaspoon is about the right quantity. So if you don't already have one in your teaspoon set, now I'm pretty lucky. I have a teaspoon set that includes the 1/8 teaspoon, which I really like having on hand. It also includes 1/2 tablespoon, which is an unusual measure to have, but I happen to like having that as well for my regular cooking. But if you don't have that already, a good thing to go out and look for is one of these mini teaspoon sets. Come on, mini teaspoons. So mine includes a dash, a pinch, and a smidgen. And any of these sets that you get on the back card, it should indicate for you what each of those translate to. So I think in that camera, come on camera. Anyway, you should be able to see that a dash is listed as 1/8 of a teaspoon in there. It's a little blurry because it wants to focus on my face and not the card. But even the pinch and the smidgen can be useful. They're 1/16 and 1/32. So basically 1/2 of 1/8 and then 1/4 of 1/8. There are situations that you'll get into sometimes where that's appropriate. I have at least one recipe that calls for a 1/16 teaspoon of something, just because that got the flavor right. 1/8 was too much. For myself, I was generally just eyeballing, 1/2 of an 1/8 of a teaspoon because I had 1/8 of a teaspoon around. All right, I talked about that enough. So I'm going to take 1/8 of a teaspoon of citric acid and add it to the bag. So that's going to include my sour component there. And we're almost there. So now we just have to add some spices to get the flavor right here. So we're making a Tex-Mex dish. Common flavorings there would be chili powder, cumin, and garlic powder. So I'm going to add those 3 things in here. For 2 of those, I'm going to get a 1/4 teaspoon, and the other one is 1/4 or 1/2, I should say. And I'm just using, basic normal chili powder, garlic powder, cumin that you can get anywhere. So a thing to know about herbs and spices in general is that even in conventional cooking, or especially in conventional cooking, spices are something that we would generally add early on in cooking because their flavors are generally fat soluble and they bloom with heat. So they're going to get more complex and fuller in your dish through the cooking process. Herbs are something that we generally add at the end of cooking because they mellow out and their flavors wash out the longer they're held over high heat. So things like thyme, oregano, basil, those are things that we should be looking to add later in our dishes when we're cooking at home. And things like garlic and chili powder and cumin, for example, are things that we should look to add early on in our cooking process to help them develop in our dishes. That's not going to happen if we're just adding water. So knowing that flavors for spices won't develop quite as much and that flavors for herbs won't diminish quite as much, we need to just adjust our thinking around those a little bit. So generally I add a little bit more spice to my dish than I would at home. And I add a little bit less of herbs than I would at home, generally. And we're only talking a little bit. I didn't add that one yet. Sorry, I got caught up. So I'm adding a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, and I added 1/4 teaspoon of cumin. And now I'm just going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of chili powder. And then really the last thing for me to do here is to add, oh, actually there's 2 things, I guess. The next thing is to add cilantro. So cilantro is, traditional Tex-Mex herb. This is something that I will add in slightly less than I would put in a traditional meal. The other thing here is that I am using a freeze-dried cilantro. And some herbs really benefit from coming in freeze-dried. And those are usually the very leafy ones. The very leafy herbs generally lose quite a bit of flavor through the dehydration process, even sun drying. So cilantro is a really good one to find freeze-dried. Basil is another example. This is my basil. You'll see it's the Lighthouse brand. This is something you're probably familiar with because you see it in the produce section at your local store all the time. So I like to keep the basil around, the parsley around, and cilantro. Those are the 3 that I find benefit the most from being freeze-dried. So coming back to that umami flavor, one of the things that we can include that has a big impact in the overall flavor for the dish is MSG or a substitute product. So I do use MSG, and I do suggest MSG in my recipes. They have a really big impact on how the dish tastes at the end of the day. I know that there is some controversy around MSG and people don't like it or are concerned about the risks that might be associated with it. There's a lot of science nowadays that suggests that the concerns or the, what's the word I want to use here? The things that were considered risks haven't borne themselves out to be proven to be risks through scientific study. So really do what you think is best for you, use it or not. I do list it as optional in all of my recipes in case you don't want to include it at all. And there are alternatives that are not MSG. For example, you could use nutritional yeast instead of MSG and achieve a fairly similar flavor profile in the finished dish. Okay, so I now have pretty much everything in here. The next step that I'm going to follow here is number 1 is I'm going to turn on my electric kettle that I would not have in the wilderness, but it's what I'm going to use tonight. So I'm going to get that hissing over here so that we get some boiling water. But my next step is I seal the bag, and you'll notice that there's quite a bit of air in this bag right now, which would make it difficult to pack. But I do that so that I have some room to shake it around. That just gets everything to mix really well and all the flavors meld, and there's a little bit of everything everywhere so that it's going to rehydrate together properly. Then I would break the seal and squeeze as much of the air out as I can and then seal it again. So here I've got a meal for the trail. This is a 1-person meal for 1 night. It's a little over 500 calories. It's, about slightly bigger than my hand altogether. It comes in a little over 100 grams. And this will last my whole trip. There's no risk of this going bad on me over even a 2-week trip, probably even a month. Well, I know even a month. My wife and I will usually make almost our whole summer of meals. A couple of weeks from now, we'll just spend a couple hours in the kitchen and batch them out and leave them in the closet for a couple months. So I know that they'll last, and that's making a meal at home. So for this dish, I did say that it was only, a little over 500 calories, which isn't a great number, right? We would like to hit a little higher than that if we are out adventuring every day. So I have found that it's quite difficult to get very far past that 500 calorie mark for meals without adding like a lot of oil or other fats to boost that up. So we do supplement a lot on our trips. So there's, snack times where we'll eat snacks, but there are ways that we can add things to dinner time. So I have a bunch of dessert recipes that do a good job of adding calories to the evening, but there's accompaniments that we can include to our burrito bowl. So I'm going to show some examples here. This is a freeze-dried guacamole available from Alpine Air. So that would be a nice addition to this dish. This will serve, I'm going to say it'll serve 2 people. It could probably serve like, 4 people, but that's going to add 150 calories per person if it serves 2 people. So that's one option. This is another option that's good if you're okay with dairy. So Moon cheese is, relatively new to the market, sometime in the last 5 years. I know you can find it at Mech. This bag happened to come from Costco in the States, so it's a bit of a larger bag for that. It doesn't melt particularly well, but it's still a nice flavor addition to this dish and is an interesting texture to include. And then there's products like this. So this is a powdered sour cream, and 2 tablespoons of that will add another 100 calories to your dish. And it's quite good. I like to add this to my own. Now, my wife can't have dairy products, so she doesn't get to have this in hers, but I include it in mine regularly. For those of you who are dairy-free or vegan, I do have recipes in my book for a dairy-free cheese sauce, as well as a dairy-free sour cream. So if you wanted to include that in this dish, there are options available for you. So when this water finishes boiling, I'm going to move my dish, probably to this guy, but I just wanted to show you some options for your cookware. So my wife and I, we carry in these, but we don't rehydrate in these. We do rehydrate in a bowl or in a mug. This is a GSI product. It's part of the Dualist Camp Cook system. So it comes with a nested bowl. One bowl has a neoprene sleeve. It's they consider it their mug, so you don't burn your hands on a hot beverage. It's got this neoprene insulator, and then it's got a sippy cup top. We will generally prep our meals like this. So we actually put the meal in the mug, but we keep the whole thing like this just to create a really good insulated bowl. And that's going to keep the temperature of our water high, which encourages good rehydration. So this is another good alternative, and this is a GSI mug. It's a pint size, so again, around 500 milliliters. It's got a full neoprene sleeve that covers the bottom, and there's a rubber gasket seal on the lid, which helps to keep that heat in as well. So if we were out in the field, I would just take my bag here. I am going to just pour it into my bowl. So another leave no trace benefit to these meals, as you'll see, is that this is the only waste that's left, and it's something that I'm going to bring home with me. So I'm at very low risk for leaving any garbage behind in the backcountry. I'm also not, doing prep outside of this bowl, so I'm not likely to spill much anywhere, which would also, leave mess in the backcountry. My water has boiled here. And I'm gonna change the camera angle so that you can watch me fill this. That should do. So, I said in the recipe earlier that you would expect to boil around 175 milliliters to rehydrate this meal. The actual instructions that I give for rehydration is to just cover it with water. And what that means is that I'm going to add water until the ingredients either start to float or the water reaches like the top of the layer of ingredients. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to pour water until that water just reaches the top because the ingredients did not float. And then I'm going to mix it up just to distribute those flavors. Again, make sure that the spices are kind of getting everywhere and everything's well mixed together. And then I'm just gonna cover this with the lid, and we're gonna wait 5 minutes and take a look at what that looks like. If I get it wrong a little, if I find that the texture isn't quite right when it's all said and done, then it's really easy to just add a little more water and wait a minute or two. And I find this to be really effective in rehydrating these meals. So that was a lot so far. I think I've touched on everything that I have on the counter with me. So I think I will open up to some questions while we wait for this to rehydrate. Yeah, so Corinne has a question as to whether or not these meals will quadruple well for a family of 4. Yes, they will. You have the option of, just multiplying by 4 and going from there, or you could, separate each one. So you could basically bring 4. Like for my wife and I, we just make 2, and because you're just rehydrating in the bowl, so it keeps it relatively even so that you know what everybody's getting calorie wise and quantity wise and that sort of thing. But you can absolutely just mix it all together and do a dish of 4. The only caveat to that is that rehydrating, it'll be a little more difficult. Not difficult, but you won't be able to do it in the bowl. You would want to rehydrate it all together in a pot so that the spices and salt and all that are equally distributed. Because if you tried to mix out 4 portions from the bag, and then rehydrate them, the likelihood is that a lot of the spice and salt will have settled to the bottom, and it won't get evenly in each bag, in each bowl. Yeah, so my book is available. So my book is available through Amazon and through Barnes & Noble in ebook, but also through my website. Chapters hasn't taken it on, so it's not available for Kobo through Kobo Direct, but you can get it from my website to work for your Kobo. The little downside to that is you have to take the step of loading it onto your Kobo yourself. It's not going to go through their normal automated process. Extra benefit is I have a discount code for you guys tonight. I'll throw it in the chat so you know what it is. That only works on my website, but you'll get a discount even on the ebook through my website. It's pretty easy. It's just Bow Water. And I did a 25% discount for you. That will be active for 1 week, and then it will stop on its own. Yeah, so Jude, most of the dairy dairy additives that I include are all powdered. So powdered milk, powdered heavy cream, powdered sour cream, powdered cheddar cheese, powdered Parmesan. So they just get included in the meal because they don't have any moisture in them when we're adding them. There's a pretty interesting, it's not everyone's favorite because you'll think, some people think it's gross, but if you don't want to go far afield to find a powdered cheese, KD now has this thing called KD Shaker that's available a lot of places. And it's a decent cheddar cheese mix. It's not the best. The Who's Your Farm cheddar cheese mix is much better, but it works. Yes, I have dessert recipes. There's a couple, there's more than a couple. There's pudding recipes, and there are what's it called now? A steamer. There's a steamer recipe, which is kind of like a dessert beverage in my book. There are dairy versions, dairy-free versions, gluten-free versions, etc. throughout. I'm also working on a new book that will, I don't know, probably be out in a year. I was hoping to have it out in the fall, but it's not going to be ready. And that's centered on this idea of making a holiday feast. So it's different from this book in that it's not a bunch of meals. It's around making one big holiday feast. Last year, my wife and I went out with friends on Thanksgiving weekend to do a backcountry trip. And while we were away, we're thinking it would be really nice to have Thanksgiving dinner while we were out here. And we are having a Thanksgiving dinner, but it's not, like a Thanksgiving dinner. So I've designed a bunch of recipes already around that is going to include a ton of new dessert recipes as well. Okay, seeing no other questions yet, I'm gonna crack this open. I guess I should change the angle again so you can see it well. So we've been about 5 minutes now waiting on this to rehydrate. And now that it's done, you'll see that you don't see water anywhere already. All the rice looks pretty fluffy and, you know, conventional. You can see the peppers in there. They're nice and soft now. They look a lot as if they'd just come off the stove and had been sauteed or something like that. Yeah, the meat's in there. You can see kind of how, you know, soft and how it breaks apart. It is canned corned beef again. So, you know, just a reminder that that's not a normal meat to include in something like a burrito bowl. If you could smell it, you would say, oh, that smells like a burrito bowl. Because I can smell it, but you can't. And yeah, it tastes almost perfect. So, yeah, so dehydrated mushrooms. I really would recommend that you check out Bulk Barn as a good option for things like that. They have a lot of stuff to make soup. Like lots of people, I won't say, I guess not lots of people. There are people who make, like for Christmas, a canned dry soup mix, right? So they'll make it up themselves, and you can get a lot of that stuff at Bulk Barn. So there would definitely be mushroom choices at Bulk Barn. They're already dried. You'll also find dried mushrooms regularly at Asian specialty stores because they get used a lot in different aspects of their traditional cooking. Thrive Life has freeze-dried mushrooms. I actually have a can of them here. They're in the basement. If you want to see them, I'll go grab them. They're not too expensive and they rehydrate really, really well. I have a recipe for an Alfredo. I call it an Appalachian Alfredo. And so it's basically a fettuccine Alfredo, except it's more with a spaghetti noodle than a fettuccine noodle. And I've tried that with mushrooms as a vegetarian option instead of like chicken or something like that. Really, really nice addition to that dish. And the freeze-dried mushrooms work really, really well. This one is probably 2 years old and it still works really well. It has clumped quite a bit, but it works really well. It still tastes good. It hasn't gone bad. They do have a best by date on here. The best by date was 2019. So I'm quite a little past that, but it's still good.
I have, Paul, a bag I dug up by Rooster in the Asian aisle called dried flower mushrooms.
Yep, that would be a good example of one that would work really well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know for sure that I'm a recipe cooker, a cookbook, you guys, and I have different cookbooks, but nothing that can do what Paul does on his cooking. That's for sure. I always have to either pre-make the meal, half make the meal before I go, and then bag it and Tupperware it and all that, and then have to finish it off there. And Paul and I were chatting before, and I know when I get on the river trips, I have no desire to really cook. I just want to have it kind of pizzazz and it's done. There we go.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I should have said that earlier, but yeah, you can buy my book at feastonadventure.com, and that's where you can use that Bowater code. So it's a coupon code. When you get through the checkout near the end, it's going to ask you if you have a coupon. There's like a place on the left-hand side to enter a coupon. You put that in and then click apply. And if anyone has any trouble with the checkout process, I'm using Square. You're probably familiar with the little white square that ends up in a lot of stores. So they have an online thing. I was already using Square for something else that I do, so I decided to use their online store for it. I've had some people report that it looks like they've bought it and then it doesn't actually go through. So if that happens to you, please take like a screenshot and send it to me, because I am working with their support services to get them to figure that out. It's not normal. So it's not happening to everybody. It's just happening every once in a while. And they've asked me to find some screenshots, and it's not like it's something that I can make happen myself. So I'd appreciate that, but you also don't have to. My email's on my website. It's paul@feastonadventure.com. So for Jennifer, if you do choose to buy the ebook from my website and you're having any trouble loading it onto your Kobo, feel free to contact me at paul@feastonadventure.com and I'll help you through that process. I do link on the download page when I email that after the ebook gets purchased. There is a link to instructions on how to load it onto your ebook, whatever kind of e-reader you have. And as I said, I do have a free ebook as well on the Feast on Adventure website. It has 10 recipes that are not in my book. So I do hope some of you might be interested in buying my book. So even if you do buy the book, you might want the ebook because there's 10 extra recipes. And it can be downloaded to yes. So the ebook, the free ebook is available in EPUB, AWZ3, which is a special Kindle type, but you don't have to have it for Kindle, and PDF. So the PDF you can download to your computer. The Feast on Adventure book as an ebook is only available as an EPUB and an AZW3. Oh yeah, right. Laura has reminded me. Laura has reminded me that I created a quiz for tonight. Laura has a tomato plant that is ready to be shared with someone. And we're gonna base that off of who wins the quiz that I've prepared tonight. And I do have at least one doozy in there as kind of a tiebreaker in case everyone was just gonna get everything right, which is quite possible. So I'm gonna throw a link to that quiz in the chat, and then I'm gonna present it so you can see it at the same time and we can see everything come in. So in the chat, I'm throwing a link to a Google form that's got 6 or 7 questions in it. And if we do have a tie score in the end, we will base it off of who completed it first will then be the winner. So I'm just gonna get that. You guys can start on it anytime. I'm just gonna get my screen ready so that I can show it without revealing answers right away. So it's going to ask you for your email address, and you should put in your name so we know who you are if you win. And then we've got some basic questions that I think I covered everything. Yeah, good. Except for the last one, I covered everything in the session. And I specifically didn't cover the last one in the session so that everyone just guesses, and it's a lucky tiebreaker if you get it right.
Les and Marie, the link is right inside the chat box.
I appear to have lost my sound. What's going on here?
Laura, I don't see the link in the chat box.
in the chat box. That's where I got it from.
Oh,
Yep.
oh, hold up.
Yep, scroll up. Scroll
Did I
up.
only
scroll
send
up.
it? I think I might have only sent it to you. Hold on. Sorry,
That's
everybody.
fine.
Oh, so Laura,
Yeah, I respond. Here we go.
Oh, that's why I'm sitting there going, I'm answering all the questions and you guys aren't. Look at that. You better hurry up.
No, Cindy, you don't have to pay shipping for the ebook. Let me see how I set that up. I think I recommend that you choose pickup, I think, to do the ebook. I will look that up as you guys do the quiz. I'll have to stop sharing my screen. Hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, I already have stopped, haven't I?
Yeah, you already stopped.
Okay.
Just one question.
I've had a few orders for the ebook recently that didn't have shipping, so why does it want you to pay shipping?
It's a good quiz. It gets us to see if we're actually listening, and I've got a few wrong already.
Yeah. Cindy, on that first page, are you able to choose pickup? Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can figure that out. So choose that, go to checkout. Okay, well, let's, Cindy, stay on the line after and I'll try to work that out with you. But for now, let's go through the quiz. I think everyone's probably done by now. I'm going to share my screen again. And then we're going to hop over here. I'll leave there. Okay, so we have 3 people who got 6 right and they all answered at the same time.
Oh,
Let's see if any of you got the tiebreaker. Okay, that one did not get the tiebreaker. Oh, geez. Did not get the tiebreaker. And all 3 didn't get the tiebreaker. Laura, you're going to have to, I don't know, flip a coin or something.
okay. Well, let's see. We have 3 people.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have one a cherry tomato plant, and say okay, Cindy's saying pick a number. We could do it that way, or the other 2.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to do it that way?
Yeah, let's do it that way.
Okay,
I will
Cindy.
stop sharing.
Yeah,
I will pick a number between 1 to 20 right now, and the nearest one to it gets it. So just throw it in the chat.
okay, those three, you guys put your numbers in the chat.
That's Angel or Angel and Gabrielle and Cindy, you said?
No, Kareen, looks like there was a
Kareen.
Kareen.
Okay. Corinne, if you have a phone of any kind, you can buy the ebook and you'll be able to read it on there. The book works really well in Apple's book, iBook, Apple Book, whatever it's called. We're just waiting for Gabrielle. All right, Gabrielle wins it. I had 13.
Oh, very good. Okay, Gabrielle. So you'll have to just give me your phone number, and then you and I can coordinate pick up, drop off, whatever the case may be. Isn't it fun having these, you guys, little contests? Oh, see. The last presenter last month too, that was one of our club members, also did a contest too. So it works out really well.
Did everyone get to see the answers? Are we all good on that? Or did you want to see the correct answers?
Yeah, let's go over that then.
All right, so the 1/8 teaspoon was the one that I thought you should have for your just add water single serving meals. The 5th flavor sense was umami. For reference, I hope everyone knows Mumbai is a city in India, and umeboshi is a sweet, sour, and salty fermented plum from Japan. I talk about it in my book. Yes, frozen was the correct answer on the veggies. And I did recommend all 3 of those as accompaniments to my fireside burrito bowl. It was none of the above on quinoa. Quinoa is a good choice because it's similar texture, similar flavor, and lots of extra protein. But it is, as far as I know, similar weight, a little more expensive, about the same time for rehydration, etc. Everyone got my book name right. That's great. And my middle name is Rand, which no one guessed because it's weird.
Awesome.
Cool.
Great presentation.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, everybody. I hope you got something out of this.
And I'm sure if you guys are involved in other groups or clubs that you might feel that Paul could be a part of a presentation there too, please reach out to Paul directly.
Yeah, I'd love to. I just threw my email up there in the chat. Cindy, if you want to be in touch with me about the book, let's get that worked out. I would love to get that to you.
And if anyone has any other questions or anything, this is, and if you think of anything afterwards, you're welcome just to email him.
And Jennifer, yes, I do have an FB page, and I have been a little delinquent lately in posting there just because I've been in the middle of a big move, but I will be picking that up again. And I should say that there's a lot of videos that I've released so far on my YouTube channel. And actually, one of the things that I go through in my book is a framework that I've developed to turn like any conventional recipe into a Just Add Water meal. And I have 2 videos about that already on my website and on Facebook that will, yeah, walk you through that process.
So a lot of times in the conventional meal, you'll have a lot more water added to it to make it more liquidy. How do you compensate for that in your meals then? Because it seems like you put less in.
Yeah, so I mean, we've already compensated that with the ingredients that we're using. The ingredients that we're using have generally already been prepared, right? Like the meat's already been cooked. The minute rice that I'm using has already been cooked. It doesn't need to absorb as much water to fluff it up and cook it. So it's gone from raw to processed or raw to cooked already and then dehydrated. So it doesn't need the same quantity of water to achieve the appropriate texture, flavor, and temperature.
Okay.
Even with the frozen veggies generally are blanched before they're frozen so that they retain color and flavor and nutrients. So they've already gone through a cooking process before they've been dehydrated.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, adding more water to these meals makes them really saucy, really soupy even. So you need to be careful about how much you do add. And I use a product called, what's it called? I'm going to look it up from my book because I'm not remembering it off the top of my head right now, even though I totally should. Quick something or something. Clear Gel. Clear Gel is a cornstarch based product that is used a lot in food service to encourage fruit pies to gel up, like a blueberry pie or a cherry pie or something like that. So I happen to use that a lot in my recipes to encourage them to achieve the right thickness. So if you think about a spaghetti sauce, right, it really sticks to the pasta. So it's not something that we would want to be soupy. And if we were just to do a rehydration with hot water, it's going to end up being really, really runny. So adding something like that gets us the right thickness. Cornstarch can be used as well. It just doesn't do quite as good a job of thickening, and it generally clumps up. So you get more lumps in it than you do with Clear Gel.
Okay. And the last thing I wanted to ask about was the fiber content in meals. Are we getting enough fiber? Their daily fiber that we need?
That's a really good question. And I think that really comes down generally to the amount of vegetables that you include in your dishes. I have not necessarily made it a priority for myself in my recipes to calculate the fiber to know for sure. I think that there is a good quantity of fiber in that, but if you are someone who is particularly looking to have greater amounts of fiber in your diet, what I recommend is psyllium husk. So that is a product that you can get at most natural food stores. I use it a lot in gluten-free cooking. It does a really good job of, so it kind of serves 2 purposes. It's similar to the xanthan gum in terms of how it creates binding in bread type products that don't have gluten in them, but it also adds a lot of fiber, and it is the main active fiber ingredient in something like Metamucil. So, you know, an 1/8 teaspoon of that isn't going to really be noticeable from a flavor or texture perspective in any of these meals, and it's going to do a really good job of adding fiber if that's something specifically that you're looking for.
That's called psyllium husk?
Psyllium husk. So it's like P-S-Y-L-L-I-U-M.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for Paul? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I have to say thank you very much, Paul, for your presentation. It's very interesting.
Yes.
Informative.
Thanks, everybody.
There's lots
Yeah, very good. I gotta tell
I
you
just
guys,
have,
yeah, go ahead. I really like having activity like this in our presentations. It's really brings up some different spices, I guess, in our conversations, and it really is the stuff that we do when we're out paddling, isn't it? Or hiking. Like, it's stuff that we do. I think it's awesome. Go ahead, Cindy.
I just had a question. I saw it was being recorded because I'm technically still at work. So
Oh,
I'm just
yeah.
wondering if I can watch it later.
Yeah, you sure can. Yeah, you sure can.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
good. Yeah,
So,
there's
yeah,
a
sorry I missed part of the meeting.
yeah, there's a few other people that couldn't make it and they've asked me to record it. Yeah.
Okay. And then I don't know if anyone wants to talk about trying to convince Mark to set up another novice night, because I saw the post on Facebook about nobody signing